Of course, I bought a book called Behooved. I don't know if my microphone was working properly for this video, and I'm speaking quieter now because our neighbors are really close and I don't want to be disruptive to them. So I apologize. Hopefully audio issues will smooth out eventually. When I walked into the store, perusing the titles for sale, I was immediately drawn by this cover. It's gorgeous, and it has a horse on it. And then the nice little subtitle, "The fate of the kingdom is riding on them," color me intrigued. I engaged step 2 of my will I get it process. It took one small paragraph on the back of the summary to convince me. To make matters worse, on their wedding night, an assassination attempt goes awry, leaving Eric magically transformed into a horse. Bianca does what any bride in this situation would do. She mounts her new husband and rides away to safety. Sign me up! As a former horse girly and fantasy romance fan, I felt like a perfect match. So let's get into Behooved. I'm going to do a quick plot summary, hopefully avoiding any major spoilers, but I do want to give a spoiler warning regardless. We are introduced to Bianca, who very explicitly has some sort of chronic illness that debilitates her every once in a while. She is called in to a meeting with her parents, who serve on the Council of Nine, and is informed that as part of a treaty to ensure that a war does not break out between her kingdom and the neighboring one, she must marry the soon-to-be crowned king of the kingdom that's threatening war. Bianca willingly agrees. It's her duty, after all, so she's shipped off across the ocean to the kingdom of Gildenheim, where, unlike in her own kingdom, Demaria, magic runs wild. In Demaria, magic is much more structured and goes towards things like clocks and fireworks and explosives. In Gildenheim, magic is much more tied to nature. There, she is snubbed by her soon-to-be husband and the soon-to-be king of Gildenheim, who seems to much rather read than deal with her. But literally the day after she arrives, they are to be wed. So they're married. There's a little blood magic ritual tying them together. They are introduced to the court. Real quick, Gildenheim, unlike Demaria, which has a council governing the kingdom, Gildenheim has a monarchy. After introduction to the court, the day is finally done. They head back to their bedrooms, and now Bianca finds herself in her now husband's bedroom, where they will consummate the marriage. It's a political marriage. They're just gonna get done and over with, as Eric so lovingly says. But before anything can happen, an assassin bursts into the room, and Bianca does her best to defend Eric. Prior to leaving, Bianca's sister Tatiana gave her a necklace that was also a magical item, which when opening the locket of the necklace would protect her from harm. So during this assassination attempt of Eric, she opens up the locket and they're blown back, and Eric is somehow magically transformed into a beautiful white stallion. They are left with no other choice but to flee the rousing assassin out the window, and off they run. And this sentence perfectly describes the rest of their adventure, or misadventure. We were heading to Demaria because I had accidentally turned Eric into a horse on our wedding night, and someone had framed me for his murder. They continue on their adventure, giving us a very fairy tale flavor to this story, in which there's attempted sale of Eric as a horse because he's a beautiful white stallion. He'd make a lot of money on the horse markets. They're robbed on the side of the road. There's the wonderful trope of there was only one bed. And here's where we get into spoiler light territory. Of course, along the way, they fall in love. And heavy spoilers. On the day of coronation, which is another blood magic ritual to keep the wild magics of Gildenheim balanced, the curse is broken, and Bianca and Eric can live peacefully and happily ever after. Let's talk about our characters. Bianca is our main character, and her entire character arc beginning is plotted out explicitly in the sentence, "This was a chance to prove myself, a chance to do my duty as Duchess Liliana, to finally have my parents deem me enough instead of merely expendable." When I read that, I knew immediately what sort of journey that we would be on with Bianca. She would eventually find herself enough, no longer having to crave the approval of her parents. And with Bianca, there is a huge emphasis on strength, bravery, and being true to who you really are, rather than who other people expect you to be. Eric is, of course, our begrudging heir. He is far more into intellectual pursuits than ruling a kingdom, for instance. He's very much our soft cinnamon roll who only comes across as cold because he believes that it was the kingdom of Damaria that threatened war. It's a whole political intrigue twist that's happening in this story as well. And as characters, they're fine. I have no complaints about them. Eric, during my first read, I described him as a bit whiplashy, which does make sense, but tonally he can just kind of go a little all over the place. With Bianca, I really love the disability representation, especially in fantasy. We absolutely need more of that in fantasy stories. But I want to take a moment to talk about the world building of this book, because I thought it was pretty solid. It was much more world building than I was initially expecting to receive from this book. One of the great ways that this book does organic world building is, for example, Bianca has a lot of specific phrases she uses that really emphasizes the world and culture of Damaria. For instance, she says things like, "What in the ocean's 100 names is going on here?" or "Seas help me," which really emphasizes the ocean theme and overall culture of the Kingdom of Damaria. This same pattern shows up a little less often, but for the Kingdom of Gildenheim, because it is much more nature-based, one of the characters exclaims, "Well, rot it to the roots," which again does a really good job of characterizing not only the character but also the world that we're in, specifically Gildenheim and its nature focus, land nature focus as opposed to the ocean. The other aspect of the world building that I thought was really interesting was the nations that are mentioned in the story. There are 4 different nation groups that make appearances in this story. Obviously, there is Damaria. They are primarily a powerhouse because they've dominated oceanic trade, again, that water motif. They also have what's called adept magic. Again, that's magic that is much more corporeal, that is palpable and tangible, of making clocks and fireworks and explosives, and they really emphasize more so the weaponry side of magic. Gildenheim, my real world equivalent to that is more Nordic countries. It's colder, people are pale and blonde. Their trade is in lumber and iron, which again brings us more to that land nature organic motif. And like I've been saying, their magic is more wild, and their magic emphasizes more on things like healing. There is the Mobilon Alliance, and they're described as having like boldly patterned fabrics. And finally, the fourth nation group is the Zay Empire, which my brain equated to Asia, like Japan, Korea, and China. And their trade is in silk. The world building was solid and much more than I was expecting from this book. That said, I noticed that the Mobilon Alliance, not only are there no characters from that nation group that we meet at all, it's also the only nation that doesn't receive a trade. I wanted to very quickly add that maybe I just didn't catch what their trade is, and also it could be interpreted that they trade in fabrics. Compared to the other nation groups in this novel, the Mobilon Alliance feels hugely underdeveloped. The Zay Empire has a little bit more characterization and development, and there is a character specifically from there, but even that they feel a little bit less developed, which is fine. Obviously, the focuses of this story are on the kingdoms of Demaria and Gildenheim. The other nations felt a lot less developed, especially the Mobilon Alliance. Also, this is far more nitpicky than it is anything else. I would have liked to have seen more for all the nation groups, more rituals, more things that made the culture and the people feel alive. And I also wouldn't have minded like a religious tone to it as well. There's pieces of it. In Demaria, they mention the virtues a lot. And in Gildenheim, there's the lady. There's a legend of Gildenheim of an alliance between the wilds of horses and the lady. And so obviously the book plot mirrors that legend of Gildenheim. Now let's discuss my special interest, the romance. I love the fact that, yes, it can be categorized as romantasy, but I love that it has this like flavoring of a fairy tale. I adore that so much. And because it's a fairy tale, that does mean that the characters fall in love with each other within days of knowing each other, which is just something I personally need to get over with a lot of romance stories, because that's just often how they work. There's a misunderstanding with a character in this book that I understand the use of this sort of misunderstanding, but I'm not the biggest fan of it. Bianca believes that Eric has a lover, and I'm glad that they weren't actually lovers and that they cleared it up. But I'm not a fan of that trope. I wish it had been just like, oh yeah, they're really close, but just as friends. That's far more a personal taste thing than anything. The humor of this book, and specifically with the romance, was one of my favorite things. I laughed out loud for sure at least twice. Specifically, this exchange. "Tell me," Eric said abruptly, "do you always wear a dagger in your sleeve?" I smiled, poison sweet. "Not at all. I find that some dresses pair much better with a rapier, but that would interfere with dancing, don't you think?" "I see. I've heard of your prowess with weapons. I hope you're not planning to use that dagger in the bedchamber." I gazed up at him innocently. I thought the bedchamber was exactly the place for, how do you say it? Swords? The word I'd used, a less than courtly term, had other meanings beside the weaponry sense. I thought it was funny. I like dick jokes though. Speaking of, I want to share with you the other joke that I thought was hilarious. "Please don't let my sister shrink you," I implored. "I like the size you are." Tatiana cackled. Eric turned red. I flushed. Never mind, size doesn't matter. I thought it was funny. Now, with the romance and far more the like sexual aspect of the romance, I personally felt like it came out of nowhere. I also wonder how much of it was the suspension bridge effect, because they've been running from danger this whole time. Also, the thing that made me not as big of a fan of this romance was the setting in which they did consummate their marriage made me uncomfortable. Semi-spoilers here, Bianca had been shot with an adept weapon, and so she'd been bleeding out. Eric managed to get her to a green witch or a healer who, removed the bullet, patched her up, she's healing. She's in essentially a hospital bed, slowly starting to heal with the help of magic. And that's when it happens. The whole time I was just sitting there like, the witch is gonna come back in the middle at any point. I wasn't as big of a fan of the setting in which their first time happened. All in all, the romance is fun, it's light, I love the fairy tale aspect of it, and the humor was definitely one of the best parts. I want to talk about the ending now. I literally wrote in my annotation notes that final chapter feels very, now I gotta tie up all the loose ends, oh no. Especially the scene with Julieta. I'm specifically leaving it vague so that I don't give too many spoilers. The scene with Julieta just felt very oops, gotta tie this up. Especially the first time that I read this book, I was like, I completely forgot about this character. Oops. So it felt very much like we gotta wrap things up. And my biggest critique of the ending is the order in which things happen. I personally would have preferred the scene with Julieta to happen immediately after the coronation rather than after Eric and Bianca have gone to bed. Bianca is stirred awake by Julieta entering the room. I felt like it should have happened before they had gone to bed. And more than that, the way the coronation wrapped up felt far more like an ending to me than the actual ending. So again, I would have kind of rearranged events so that the coronation, the winding down of that, and the final dialogue moments between Bianca and Eric would have been the ending. So that's kind of my biggest critique of the ending. In conclusion, despite the more deadpan of my voice and the criticisms that I have of this book, I enjoyed my time. That's why I rate this fairly high, like a 3.8 to a 4 out of 5 stars. I had fun, I enjoyed myself, it was entertaining. Again, the fairy tale aspect of it was fun, the horses, the horse puns were fantastic. I mean, I knew that right off the bat, from the fate of the kingdom is riding on them to the double entendre of she mounts her new husband and rides away to safety. That was so fun, so enjoyable. So again, I enjoyed my time, and I believe it would behoove you to read Behooved. Thank you guys so much for watching. Like, comment, share, subscribe, all that stereotypical YouTuber stuff, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Bye! Also, real quick, can we just acknowledge the totally asymmetrical little horse hooves that I did under my eyes? Yeah, you're welcome. Symbology? Is that a word?